Welcome to this webinar on adverse childhood experiences in the Godly Place Circle. My name is Michelle Brown. I'm a trainer here in Scotland with Godly Place Scotland, and I'll be your door person tonight. And in a moment, our speaker, Susie Steele, will guide us through learning more about adverse childhood experiences and how the Godly Play Room can be a safe space for those who have experiences of ACEs. So just to introduce Susie. So Susie Steele is a Godly Play trainer with Godly Play UK and also an ACEs trainer. And she brings with her so much experience of running a Godly Play room in a very deprived end of a neglected city. It is a blessing to be in the circle with you today, Susie, and to hear more of your story and what you've learned and what you're continuing to learn. Welcome, Susie.
Hi, what a lovely introduction. Thank you. Yes, I think what I've learned and what I'm continuing to learn is very relevant. I am continuing to learn on this journey. So ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it's a wonderful opportunity to talk about how my two worlds overlap, really. So as Michelle said, I'm a Godly Play trainer, but I'm also an ACEs trainer, and there's our logo in the middle at, with ACEs UK. That's who I deliver the training with, and that's what I've been doing today, actually. So I'm just going to introduce myself a little bit more. This is a poster that you'll see on the wall behind me. I'm very proud of this poster. This is an event that I did in July, an online event, kind of a conference really, looking at ACEs in where I live. So I started out life as a primary school teacher and did nearly 30 years of that. And then but felt increasingly as I was teaching that there was some children in each cohort who just who were struggling with the classroom environment, were struggling with the way we did discipline at school. And my instinct was that those children who were struggling needed a different approach. Instead of punishment, they needed actually a bit more attention, they needed more play, they needed more of my time. But increasingly found myself going against the grain and rubbing people up the wrong way, as I was told that because I was doing something different, it was confusing the children. And, you know, in a way I agreed with them, but I knew that the standard way wasn't working, and I didn't agree with it. But I didn't have the language to express how I felt it was wrong. I didn't understand. I couldn't justify my thinking of how these children needed a different approach. And it was only when I left my classroom job and became a supply teacher, and then was volunteering in the local community, the same place I was running a Godly Play classroom a day a week. I also started a baby group with the mums there and the carers and granddad. Actually, there was a granddad in the group, and I was researching ways to improve attachment and early language for the children in that group. A very deprived area of Hull, where I live. And as the child's earliest teacher, the first teacher they might have, I knew that I could see a difference in the children that had a lot of language and had good attachment with their parents and the way they thrived in the classroom. And so I thought, well, this is something we could have an impact with our baby group. And so started the baby group, started doing some research about activities we could do at the baby group that would improve attachment, and stumbled across a woman called Suzanne Zeedyke, who had a page on Facebook called Connected Baby. And so I was communicating with her, and she was sending me some very useful advice about activities I could do at the baby group. And then it was, as I was doing that research, she started talking about ACEs, and she talked about a conference that she was doing in Scotland called the ACE Aware Nation. And I couldn't go, but luckily all the talks were on Facebook Live and then on YouTube. And so I was able to watch all the talks, and I was blown away. And I just suddenly thought, this is it. This is the language I need to describe these children, what's different about these children, and why the way we do discipline and parenting for some of them wasn't working for them. They needed a different approach. And so that sort of activated me, really. I went away, I read some books, and I did an event in 2019. We did a film screening of, it's on this poster, Resilience, the Biology of Stress and the Science of Hope. We showed this film in the Hull-Minster. We had 220 people. We had a panel of experts, which I chaired, and a roving mic. And so we were able to talk about what that meant for us in our city of Hull. And then, as I said, in July this year, I was able to do another online free event for people, where we looked at the same film again. We also had made a film, and if you're interested in seeing this film, just email me, and I'll give you the link at that address at the end. And the film we made was about people's own experience of growing up in Hull with trauma in their lives, and what it meant for them, and the impact that had on them, but also what made the difference for them. And so the second day of the event was much more about what's the situation in Hull, what can we do about it, and what's already going on. And luckily, I have lots of very amazing friends in Hull who are doing lots of healing, different things, gardening and meditation and music and dance. That was already going on. So that was wonderful. We could do that in the afternoon and have workshops about that. And then at the end of the day, we were able to have a closing speaker from the ACE Aware Nation, which was great, to give us some advice about where to go next. So that was the event. And all this time I've been doing ACEs training, but I have been a Godly Play trainer for much longer. And in lockdown, I was asked by Rebecca Nye to contribute to an article that Anne Richards had written about the impact of the pandemic on children's well-being and godly play and childhood spirituality. And I read her article and I thought, I've got nothing to contribute to this. She said it all really well. And then I thought, actually, after I've read this, I then think, well, what is it that children actually need? What is it these children who've experienced trauma actually need? And then I thought, actually, what they need is a godly play classroom. And everything I've been reading about being a trauma-informed teacher is already there in a godly play classroom. And so, and that was my contribution to the article. And so that started me thinking a lot more about how trauma-informed the godly play classroom is, just in its basic DNA. So this is probably the most important slide of the day, because especially in the first bit of the session, when I'm talking about what ACEs are and the impact of ACEs on society, is that what I find is that people who care are people who have either experienced this or love someone who's experienced this, and it's something they care about and they want to change and have an impact on. But that means there might be things that we'll be talking about that might be a bit upsetting, a bit triggering. So be aware of how things make you feel. And think about, where is it in your body that you're feeling this response? Is it in your tummy? Is it in your shoulders? Do you find yourself clenching your jaw when we talk about certain things? And be aware of that happening when you're with the children, and be mindful to put it to one side, so that when you are working with children who are bringing their own trauma, you can be fully available and not have your own worries and traumas and memories churning up in front of your mind and distracting you from being fully present to them. So we'll discuss what are ACEs, how they might appear in a Godly Play session, how being trauma informed can help us to become trauma sensitive, and then there'll be discussion. So ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences which occur prior to your 18th birthday. Examples include physical, sexual and emotional abuse, physical or emotional neglect, having a parent or caretaker or someone else in the home who's mentally ill, or a parent or someone in the house who's alcoholic or substance abuser, in jail, or a victim of domestic violence, and absence of a parent through divorce, death or abandonment. Racism, poverty, discrimination and community violence can also contribute heavily to trauma and ACEs. So because of the nature of the study, the original study in 1998, some things like racism, poverty and discrimination weren't on the original list, but that is by no means to say they are not traumatic. Since the original study in 1998, more and more have been conducted. The original study identified 10, so you got a score out of 10. So if I've experienced an emotional neglect or abuse or sexual abuse, you could give yourself like 1 point for each one. Similar studies have been found every time with more than 200 different studies. No part of the population is free of ACEs, and they are common in all classes and across all gender and race. Certain environments may make ACEs more likely, but anyone can have these unfortunate experiences. So as on the previous slide said, if you're growing up in poverty, then unfortunately that may make ACEs more likely. So around half of all adults in England have experienced at least one form of adversity in their childhood or adolescence. So 52% in England have experienced 0 ACEs, they say. I'd like to see that study done again post-pandemic and see if that changes anything. 23%, so these pink people, 1 ACE. 16% 2 to 3 ACEs, these dark blue people, and then 9% experienced 4 or more ACEs. So well, maybe that doesn't look too bad, actually. It's only 9%, and it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 ACEs all bunched together. But one of the reasons 4 or more, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 are all put together is because a researcher at Bangor University called Professor Mark Bellis, he termed the 4 or more ACEs as being the tipping point, that when you get to 4 or more, the statistics seem to stack against you. It's much harder to thrive when you've got 4 or more ACEs accumulating. So that's England, and I did have a look for some more data more internationally because of this audience being a very international one, and I'm afraid the US was the only other one I could pin down that had comparative data. So very similar data really. So we've got 33% with none, 28 with 1, and then 17, 18 for 2, and then because we had 2 and 3 together on the previous slide. And then 4 or more, we've got on the previous slide as being 9%, which is really very similar if you combine those two together. Now, what impact do ACEs have? So what we found is that it impacts the child's development, their relationship with others, and they increase the risk of health harming behaviours, experiencing poor mental and physical health outcomes in adulthood. So all of these statistics on this infographic are about if you've got 4 or more ACEs, you're twice as more likely to binge drink and have a poor diet, 3 times more likely to be a current smoker, 4 times more likely to have low levels of mental well-being and life satisfaction, 5 times more likely to have underage sex, 6 times more likely to have unplanned pregnancy, teenage pregnancy, 7 times more likely to be involved in violence, 11 more times more likely to have used illicit drugs, and 11 times more likely to have been incarcerated. So when you look at those statistics, it gives you an idea of the cost to society that these early life experiences are having on all of us. And one of the things we do in the day's training is we think about the cost to the NHS, we think about the cost to the prison service. It costs over 3 billion a year to pay for people to be incarcerated, and 84% of prisoners have at least one ACE. And so when you look at it like that, really what we're doing is locking up, people with childhood trauma. And what we could be doing is spending that money right at the start and, investing at the beginning and intervening early, giving that support so that that cost doesn't land on us later down the road. So if you are unlucky enough to have adverse childhood experiences, so starting at the bottom of this triangle, then that can disrupt your brain development, that neurodevelopment. High levels of cortisol in the body very early on impact your brain development. Your brain adapts to its environment. So if it's a very stressful environment, it grows a brain that is ready for a dangerous and fearful place that they're growing up in, which means your amygdala, where your fear, fight and flight response, your emergency alarm, as it were, in your brain, that gets much more investment and grows bigger and stronger, as it were, and your prefrontal cortex, with your higher level thinking and your thought and your reasoning and your empathy and your understanding of consequence of your actions, all of that is impaired. It develops at the cost of the amygdala. So if your emergency light is on, your human brain, as it were, is off. It cannot grow unless it feels safe. And so you get this disrupted neurodevelopment, which then leads to cognitive and social impairment, which can lead to unhealthy behavior, which then leads to illness and social problems, and sadly, early death. And actually, exposure to ACEs can actually shorten your life by 20 years without intervention. So I wonder how and why ACEs have such an impact on the whole body. And we can have a little bit of a chat now. So I'll unshare for a moment. And you can, if you'd like to contribute to this conversation. Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Judy, for the Suzanne Zedike notification. She's worth listening to. So I wonder how else you think ACEs might impact our society.
I was just thinking about what you said about the impact on the whole body, and just looking back over my last week and where I felt stressed and what it's felt like to me in my body, and just trying to imagine what it might be like to feel like that most of the time if you're a child in an extremely stressful situation, living maybe with with ongoing trauma. That amount of cortisol and adrenaline just constantly pumping around your body.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wonder how else it might impact your body.
I guess there's emerging. Sorry.
Yeah. Hi, Alison.
I guess there's emerging research on the kind of brain gut thing as well, isn't there? So it isn't a case of, there's your head and that's your brain development, but actually we are whole people. So yeah, it's going to
absolutely
affect more than just your brain.
Yeah, absolutely. So distress in the brain can give you a very upset tummy, but also if you eat certain things, and that can actually have an impact on your sense of well-being as well. We are whole beings, absolutely. The problem is for years and years culturally, our body has been taken care of by different specialists, hasn't it? You have your brain specialist, you have your gut specialist, you have your heart specialist, you have your lung specialist, and then they don't talk to each other. And you're in hospital and you might have a few things wrong with you and a few specialists dealing with you, and yet each one only sees the bit of your body that they're interested in rather than that whole person. And I hope that the future will be that we are more treated as whole beings. That's in the UK anyway. I'm not sure about any elsewhere in the world. So if you could imagine that child who has a very well developed emergency light, okay, it's oversensitive and they're scanning all the time. Imagine what it's like for them in a conventional classroom with 29 other children, and they're being told to sit still, they're being told to listen, they're being told to be quiet and take their turn. How difficult that is if actually you're kind of in a state of terror most of the time and you can't really calm down. Bonnie would like to contribute. Yes, Bonnie.
Hi there. Yeah, it was just when you were asking about the effects on the body and those descriptions of a child in the classroom, and however even at that early stage of their life they start to find ways to self-soothe or self-medicate, and as that then goes on in later life, or the smoking behind the bicycle shed or whatever, and then alcohol, and then whether it's drugs, and then the impacts of these things on their body, never mind all the risks that are associated with those behaviours, and then the additional risks that are associated with those behaviours, never mind the social impacts and emotional impacts, and then potential isolation, and it all just becomes a horror story, really. So it's pretty tragic, really.
It is. Thank you, Bonnie. Yeah, that that self-soothing is so, we don't realize actually how much these children are actually suffering inside, and they do need to self-soothe. And I'm going to give you a little activity to do when we get to the circle building part of the discussion. We can actually help them with that. We can give them a few little activities which are soothing and calming in the Godly Play room, actually. But yes, so you might find children are rocking and they're fidgeting and they're biting. I work in a women's refuge at the moment, working with the children, and I've got a little boy who, when he's anxious, he gnaws at his fingers. So it's really easy to see, but other children might suck their thumb. That might be soothing for them, even till quite an older age, because they need to do that. Oh yes, Rondi.
Yeah, this makes me think a little bit of I think I have experience with autism, and it makes me think of a lot of the neurodiversity things with neurodiverse communities, and the trauma I think that that may not come from necessarily some of the other ACEs, but I think there's just trying to mask and trying to adapt, I think, is its own trauma. And just a lot of this is resonating with me in regards to just working with neurodiverse kids and having a neurodiverse daughter as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think,
oh yeah, go ahead.
So there's a big overlap, definitely. Yeah.
Well, it calls to mind some of the work, the polyvagal theory work from Stephen Porges. I don't know how you say his name.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd like to learn more about that, definitely. And you know, how even just breathing stimulates that vagal and that's so calming. And I think we all could do with learning a little bit more about polyvagal theory and the vagus nerve and what it does. Definitely, I think that's a whole other webinar, but it's worth finding out about, because it's very powerful work. And going back to what Alison said about the mind body thing, it once you start looking at vagal nerve theory, you've got that exactly what it is all about, is that whole how everything goes up and down, back and forth, connected by the vagal nerve, basically. Yes, Judy.
Your answer to Rhonda's question, and Rhonda's question now makes me wonder whether going on from that original ACEs study that had that had just a fairly limited number of experiences in childhood, whether today it would be fair to suggest that an undiagnosed or late diagnosis of a neurodiverse condition such as autism could be a circumstance, you know, an adverse childhood experience itself that would
quite possibly, yeah, if they are made to fit in, and appear neurotypical. I think that's very traumatic for a child who's not neurotypical. And I think the thing that you're describing as being traumatic is the expectation, the unrealistic expectation. And I think that's what sets Godly Play apart from mainstream, is that you can actually have a mix of children. You can have your 3-year-old and your 15-year-old and your 12-year-old in the circle with you together. And it's so open and it's so child-centered that you don't get that grating expectation in a welcoming Godly Playroom, I would hope. Anyway, so, and my hope is eventually that all schools will become trauma-informed spaces and trauma-aware spaces, so that you know, it doesn't matter who you are, you're welcome, and you're you know, everybody's welcomed for their own differences and strengths. So, and going back to the body, another impact that I forgot to mention is you get we were talking about the developing amygdala, and if it's in a very level of high stress, then that's switched on at the expense of the development of the prefrontal cortex. Also in your prefrontal cortex is you're developing autoimmune system. And so if in the very early days you're exposed to toxic levels of stress without the presence of a reassuring person that you can adult who can calm you, then what can happen is you end up with a undeveloped or underdeveloped autoimmune system, and that can impact your ability to fight off diseases and cancers, and you may end up with a higher propensity for autoimmune diseases. And I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing more and more autoimmune issues in children coming through schools. I know as a teacher, year on year, I had more inhalers in the cupboard, it felt like, and you know, pumps of eczema creams and allergies. They just seem to be increasing year on year. Anyway, we're going to watch a short video now. It's a very useful little film. It sort of sums up quite a lot in a very short little space of time. But if you do use it, I would recommend giving people a trigger warning like I did at the beginning, that sort of look after yourself, because it goes straight into that noise, that screaming noise. And I know that the children I work with would find that very triggering, and I probably wouldn't use it with them. So ACEs are just one part of a person's story. They're not the end of the story. They can lead to some bad things happening by disrupting brain development, but they don't have to. Having support and resilience can make his negative effects go away. So this is Nadine Burke-Harris, who was one of the people that actually got me completely switched on to ACEs, the keynote speaker at the ACE Aware Nation. She says, one of the biggest myths is that we have to bust is that if you have experienced childhood adversity, there's nothing we can do about it. There is something we can do about it. The good news, although the impact of experiencing ACEs when you're young can have devastating effects, there are some very successful and highly functioning people out there who have high ACE scores. What do you think made the difference for them? All right, so I think I'll stay on sharing. So if anybody wants to call out, what do you think made the difference for people who had a lot of trauma in their childhood, maybe, and yet you don't seem to necessarily see the impact in them as adults?
Another significant adult instead of parent.
Absolutely. So someone who was there for them, who metaphorically held their hand through the dark time. Absolutely.
Good neighbours, good teachers, good friends or clubs or whatever, things that they can be external from the stressors of home life. Yeah,
absolutely. So that village around the child. It's it's a very old saying, it takes a village to raise a child. It's very true. And unfortunately, our modern society has broken us off into little compartments. It's my child, I'll raise them my way. Actually, I think for the child's point of view, we all need to be parenting each other's children and supporting the parents as well. So this is a lovely little infographic that you could find it for yourself there. It's on aceshub.org.uk, and I looked at that, what protects young people from ACEs, and I thought, that's really interesting. I wonder where you see the practice of godly play in this wheel. So if we start at the top with the turquoise, positive and supportive family environment. Well, when when you've had a group for a while, the door person and the storyteller, isn't that a positive and supporting family style environment? And someone you can build a relationship with over week after week after week and get to know. And then if we go around, we've got safe and mutual relationship with peers. Well, if we invest in that circle building, we can make that classroom a really safe place. We can build those relationships and connections with others who might not be from the same class at school. It might be, from outside school. And build those connections, that community, that sense of community, not being alone, is so important. And then if we go to this dark pink, we've got access to a wider, supportive and understanding community. So I think that's a picture of a church, to be quite honest. But that sort of, godly play, that godly play classroom is that wider, supportive and understanding community for some children. Certainly was for that group I had. And then we've got a darker black section here, the ability to regulate emotions and manage emotional distress. Well, there is a place for helping children with that in the godly play classroom. We, as you say, we invest in that circle building time and that can be a time to express emotions, and the feast at the end, and obviously through the wandering and listening to the story, and in the response time. It can be a really powerful way of working through some feelings that have been brought up by the story without that requirement of let's make a sheep or let's do an activity about the story. That might not be the thing that's at the front of their mind. That might not be the feeling that has been brought up by that story. And that response time allows the children time to regulate and manage their emotions. And then we've got this light grey box, acquisition of practical problem solving skills. Well, you need to be able to problem solve to share, don't you? And take turns with resources and take turns in conversation. So I think there are opportunities for that in a Godly Play classroom. And then we've got a deep amber, compassionate, attuned and supportive responses from professionals. Well, I think what we have to do is make sure that if professionals, as in outside professionals, are involved or need to be engaged, that we do make those connections, that we do make recommendations according to our safeguarding policy, and that the parents are supported in following that up and chasing up and making sure that the family and the child are supported appropriately. And then early intervention from support, therapeutic and safeguarding services. I think that's the same. I think it's really important that anybody in a Godly Play classroom has safeguarding training. Absolutely, absolutely very important. And that making sure that it's up to date is very important, and that you are talking to each other and recording any safeguarding concerns, and everybody knows what the protocol is if they have a safeguarding concern. And then trauma-informed policies and systems that address bullying, harassment and victimization. Well, I think the Godly Play classroom, especially, again, as I say again, if you invest in that circle building time and you model how to be with one another, then that should do that job pretty well. Peter Levine is a wonderful person who writes a lot about trauma, but he wanted to make sure it was clear that trauma is not what happens to us, because, you know, you and I might be in the same accident, we might be in the same traumatic experience, but what happens to us, what we hold inside, is what the trauma is, and it is what we hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness, which causes the damage. So especially those children who've gone through things with parents who are absent for some reason or other. They might be in the room, but they're not there. They're not emotionally available because they're distracted, because they're scared, they're distracted because they're mentally ill, they're distracted because they are under the influence of something. And so they cannot be that empathetic witness. And if their child is going through something horrible, then they can't be that support for their child. I would hope that children who come from homes like that, who then go into a Godly Playroom, would find that empathetic witness, possibly with somebody in that room. Here's Nadine Burke-Harris again. We have the capacity for neuroplasticity throughout our lives, and our environments shape the way that our brains respond to our experiences. Safe, stable, and nurturing relationships are healing for kids and for all of us. So we were talking about the way early high levels of toxic stress in a child's life can change the brain. Well, neuroplasticity means that we can continue changing our brain for the better. We can heal. And that being in an environment with safe, safe, stable and nurturing relationships can really make a difference for that. And for children who suffer trauma, relationships are key. When a person has been hurt in a relationship, they can only be healed in a relationship. And Betsy Cherry said that in 2017, and I think it's very, very true. And, you know, those children, those very young children who have had that broken link between parent and child very much need that healing through relationship, and those adults in the Godly Playroom can provide that connection and love that they need. And Philippa Perry, who's married to Grayson Perry, says all behaviour is communication. So behind behaviour, you'll find the feelings. So we'll say all behaviour is communication. They're trying to tell you something. I wonder why they're behaving that way. I wonder what they're trying to tell us. So be curious. Be curious about if a child is behaving in what you might call a challenging way, but I would like to ask you to call it distressed behaviour rather than challenging behaviour. It changes how you think about it. And if a child is exhibiting distressed behaviour that might be disrupting your Godly Play circle, then there probably is a reason. There probably is a reason. And so be curious. Dan Siegel talks about the window of tolerance. Window of tolerance is where things feel just right, where you're best able to cope with the punches life throws at you. You're calm, but you're not tired. You're alert, but you're not anxious. So that's your window of tolerance. And we've all got a window of tolerance. And difficult times may bring us to the edges of the window, but our own regulation systems and strategies will serve to bring us back to equilibrium. But children with trauma have a smaller window of tolerance. And because they're on high alert the whole time, they've learned to be on high alert a lot of the time, and so will more easily find themselves in a state of fight, flight or freeze. Not try and reason with a child or a person who's out of their window of tolerance. They're not able to think logically at that time. Just focus on calming strategies, and we'll come to an example of that in a bit. So let's look at the elements of a Godly Play session with a trauma-informed lens. Louise Bomber, who's written her book, What About Me, emphasises the importance of routines, having a key person, having a safe place, consistency and predictability in the trauma-informed classroom. Now, what does that remind you of? I think all of those things are what we see in a Godly Play classroom. So I'm going to just go through a Godly Play session piece by piece. Before the children or adults arrive, I wonder, are you ready? I know that when I'm a storyteller, my door person always asks me, are you ready, before they admit the children? And I think even before that, you might need to prepare. I wonder if you've played with the story for yourself on your own and found the treasures and challenges in the story for yourself today. I wonder if you have been through that ready. And is the door person ready? I wonder if the door person or you together are in a position to find out about what the children's needs are and what life might be like for them this week before they come even. If you're in a church community, you might have some kind of network where you can communicate with parents, and parents can say, actually, they've had a really bad day at school, a really bad week, or this has happened, or the dog died. All of these things might be useful for you to know about before they come. And then if a child has any special needs, it's very useful to know about that before they come, obviously, and any additions you need to make to the room, or adaptations to the room that might help them settle. They might need a special cushion to sit on. Is the room ready? Is it clear? Is it tidy? are things where they should be? And are you calm? That's so important as well. I think that's one of the things I check in with myself when I'm asked, are you ready? I'm like, okay, take a moment. Am I calm? Am I ready for these children? Because they'll come in like this, won't they? And when they come to you and your presence, everybody is more likely to be calm. Although I will talk about my experience in a moment. So when their storm meets our calm, co-regulation occurs, and that's what we're aiming for. We're aiming to help children learn to calm themselves, because those children who've experienced toxic levels of stress early on in their lives never learned to calm themselves. Not like the babies you or I may have had, who had lots and lots of calming time when they cried, cuddles when they fell down, time to talk about their feelings. They never had that. And so you need to help them with that. And it's vital that you bring your own calm to the situation. Some children may benefit from seeing a visual timetable of the session before they come. And we will be emailing this to you after the session, and when we email you the PowerPoint. So this is something that I discovered on the Godly Play UK Facebook page, and it's been so useful to me. This is chopped up into little cards, and then you lay them out on the floor or on the wall if you've got a way of sticking them on the wall. And I work with a family with 2 adopted boys, and every Sunday we do Godly Play at my house. And before they came the first time, I brought this to their home and I went through it and I laid it out on the floor and I said, this is what we're going to do, and this is what it'll feel like, and when we've done this, then we'll do this, and then when that's done, this will be next, and so on and so forth. And then when they came the first week, we laid it on the floor, and then I showed them where we were on the timeline, and actually we turned over the ones we'd done so they knew what was next. And so it was very helpful. And I know I've as a Godly Play trainer, I've given this out to a few different people who also use it. So you will get a copy of that. So the welcome. I wonder how we could make this a smooth transition for the anxious, angry, or upset child or adult. I wonder how we could do that. Has anybody got any ideas they'd like to contribute, how that could be helped along? I mean, the picture is quite helpful, actually, isn't it? I think
Bonnie has her hand up. Want to hear from Bonnie?
Oh, Bonnie, sorry, Bonnie, I didn't see your hand. Bonnie.
That's all right. Yeah, I'm just kind of thinking about really that affirming them and how it's great to see you. You know, to give that positive, simple but very positive message, and it may be the only time they're hearing that, and how really grateful we are to see them, and how they're special and unique and valued, and we welcome them.
Oh, it's so powerful. It really is. And I think to give some sense of they've been in your mind since you last saw them. That's really powerful as well. It's just, oh, no one.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry, Bonnie, you talk for a bit.
No, yes, I'm just agreeing with you. Yeah, absolutely. How are they been? We've been thinking of them, and they're in our mind. They're not forgotten.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I have a little photo on my fridge of the 2 little boys to show them that I think of them through the week. And that's a really important thing for a traumatized child, because it's almost like they disappear when they walk out the door and they don't exist anymore for you, and actually they really do. And also, I mean, this little girl's being greeted with a handshake. It might be that they don't want to hold your hand. It might be that they they just want to wave, or a smile is enough. Or during the pandemic, we were all doing lots of elbow bumps, weren't we? So I think just knowing the children, getting to know them is so important, and knowing what they would like is really important. And I know in some classrooms, in some schools, they have a sort of grid on the door, and you can point to the picture that says how you would like to be welcomed. You know, it might be they want a hug, you know, so they can point to the hug picture, or it might be they want a high five, so they point to the high five picture, and then you can respect that, and that is reassuring and helpful for them to come into the space knowing they have been seen and they are really welcome. They really are welcome.
I had one person, one young man who always wanted to be one of the first people in the room, but he was very, very rarely ready to be in the room. But if he had to wait, he would wind himself up and then not be ready at all. So what we ended up doing was we had an armchair that was further, like just in a corner, just kind of a cozy corner. We moved it closer to the door, so he would come in and he'd sit in that chair. He'd be welcomed, one of the first people, and then he'd just sit in the chair and he'd stay there, and he would actually listen to the story from there. But he could get himself ready once he was in the room, but he couldn't get himself ready while he was waiting to cross the threshold. It was fascinating to see that, but he just needed to be in. So we adapted things so he could come in, he could talk to the person, and then he would just go sit off by himself and spend actually most of the morning there. And then when all the rest of the children went off to do their work, he'd come and we'd talk about the story.
Brilliant. That's a really good adaptation to what he needed. Absolutely. Yeah. The children I work with really struggled with getting ready and lining up. I know that an article I wrote years ago described them as being, it felt like there was a herd of ponies out there. It was just so noisy and shouty and clattery, out there, because it was after school. They'd been at school all day, and it was hard for them to calm down. They needed to let something out. So we let them do a bit of, a running around in that space and greeting each other. They hadn't seen each other all day. That was important. They needed to sort of do a little bit of physical play out there for a little bit. And then after a few minutes, they started to calm down, and then we'd welcome them into the room. And sometimes they weren't as ready as they could be, but I would have needed a whole room of armchairs. That was the group I had. I needed a whole room of armchairs. So, and they were hungry. So what we did, we fed them. And so that was a calming thing. So after the welcome,
just say Fiona has her hand up as well.
Oh yeah, sorry, Fiona.
I was just going to say that I found that bringing the children in one by one and calmly sort of helped them to center, and then the storyteller would be anchoring the circle. So I think that was and the other thing is, I think having that transition from coming in from church into the room, I think it was really important to have everything how they expected it. Yes. So not have a stranger there watching, or, just to make everything as familiar as possible, just until they're settled. Yeah. I found that valuable.
Absolutely. Yeah. Brilliant. Yes, absolutely. That slowing down the children as they come through is really important. Yes, Randy.
I was going to just saying about the eating as well. At our church, we often did communion first, kind of you don't need to do anything to have communion, was part of the theology of it. But in that sense, we mirroring worship, we'd often have our snack, our feast and godly play first as well, because I found we do ours on Sunday morning, but I just find so many kids are hungry when they get there and then they can't focus at all. So we just would have our feast right off the bat.
Yeah. Well, that's just like us. Yeah.
Just like you. Yeah. I think it's just sometimes it's that just really adapting to what your group needs, I think, is the biggest thing.
It is absolutely. We actually had 2 feasts.
Yeah, exactly.
Jerome says if you don't do anything else, always do the feast. And so we actually had 2. So we started with something chewy and filling that was quite regulating. So I think you may find a lot of school breakfast clubs give out bagels. And I think that this is one of the reasons they give out bagels, because they're really chewy. They, you have to really invest in chewing those, and that chewing is a very calming thing to do. And so we'd give them something like a bagel, and we'd build the circle while we ate, and do a bit of sharing about the day, and really invest in that. And some days we might play a game to try and build that circle and make sure it was a safe place, because the children that I was having in that particular Godly Play circle were children who were all sorts going on at home, all sorts of terrible, horrible things, and then they were having to go to school, and things may or may not have gone very well at school, and then they were coming out and coming to Godly Play, and they just had enough. They had just had enough. And so some of them were quite tearful and very low, and some were very aggressive and very angry, and some were just very, very invisible, and all signs of stress going on. And so it took a lot of work to build the circle, and there were some weeks where it really didn't feel safe, and so it wasn't quite the right day to have a story. So we'd go straight to the response, and then we'd have a feast, and a sort of smaller feast afterwards. So it was tricky for us to build a safe space, because there was so much trauma being brought into the classroom that we had. So I had to be very careful about that and how I managed it. And, it was a steep learning curve, and sometimes I didn't do it very well, and some days it went really well. I can remember, I'll come to that. Oh, building the circle. Yes, I was going to teach you this activity. So it's called the butterfly hug. I don't know whether you've heard of this. So you hold yourself like you're giving yourself a cuddle, and you breathe in and hold it. Breathe out. Notice your breathing, a few breaths. Hold it and breathe out, and then start tapping. So one with one hand and then one with the other hand. So you're alternating, tap, 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 tap. Now you might want to do it gently. You might want to do it firmly. You might want to gradually get faster. And you can do that for as long as you need. And it's a very centering, cross-brain activity that then you might want to end with a bit of a cuddle. And that might be something that you might find helpful if you've got a few children who are finding it difficult to settle. It's just a little calming activity. So telling the story and wondering, what might we need to be aware of when we're choosing stories? I mean, we might be working through the calendar, as I was I was working through, and I'd just done Exodus, and I was about to do Exile and Return, and Russia invaded Ukraine. And I think it was actually the morning before I was going to tell the story with the two boys experienced trauma. I rang Mum and I said, I'm just about to do this story and it's got lots of invaders in it and war. And she's like, no, don't go there, don't go there. She says, we can't even have the news on at home because it's so upsetting for the children and triggering, and it's frightening them. So I just did a completely different story for them that day. But for certain children, themes such as babies being born might be triggering, death and dying might be triggering, but also might be quite helpful for some children. Plight of refugees, especially now, war, crime, punishment, or terrorism might be triggering. Certain seasons, birthdays, Mother's Day, Halloween, Christmas, all of these things can trigger children who've experienced trauma and start them on an upward spiral emotionally. So get to know your group, get to know what their triggers are, get to know what things you need to be aware of story choice wise, and know what's safe for your group if you can. Obviously, if you've got different children coming every week, that's really hard to do, but what you can do is notice if a story is affecting a child and get the parents to talk to you. So, you know, hopefully the Godly Playroom will be a safe enough space for these things to be explored, but make sure parents are aware that a delayed reaction once they're home is information you need to know. So a conversation is helpful, as it can be a combination of things. You know, it could be something their friend said, something that happened to school, and the story all together combined caused something to happen at home where they felt super safe. That's when you see the worst behaviour, sadly. It's when children feel the safest places where you see the meltdowns. So that's things to be wary of and to be aware of for the story and the wondering. But what I found with children with trauma in the wondering is you get quite a lot of exaggerated storytelling, which is obviously not true. And you can get some stories that paint the child as a victim, but be sure to listen. They might be telling you something that has safeguarding concerns. So don't dismiss these made up stories where they might have been taken off in a UFO, or a stranger with a hooded cloak with knives for fingers came and took them away. It might be that they are telling you something else in the form of a story. Bonnie, is your hand up?
When you're talking there, you're actually making me think, though, about the importance of I suppose, that whole setting, though, and being aware of what the children are saying or doing or whatever. So, but sorry, that was an accident if I touched the hand up button.
That's fine. That's
so
fine.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No, you always have something helpful to say, so it's great. But a first step when they are telling you these sort of slightly outrageous stories is to underreact, but don't contradict. Don't tell them, oh, that can't be true because such and such and such and such. You know, listen, but avoiding them. It could be that they just don't know what to say, so they've made up a story because you'll listen to them and you'll connect with them, and it's attachment seeking behavior. So listen to them, you know, listen. But always, as I said before, keep your safeguarding training up to date and know what you have to do if you do need to share a safeguarding concern. You will get some children who chatter, and they just can't seem to get all the words out fast enough, and they don't seem to stop, and that could be actually verbal stimming. So that, you know, it's actually their way of calming, to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. But, you know, again, try and give them enough time to say what they want to say, because they might be reaching out for an attachment with you as well. Response time. Now, how might that be a source of anxiety to some, and how can we alleviate or prevent it? So, you know, I've definitely worked with adult groups, teachers particularly, who can get quite panicky when I say, here's the response materials, it's time for you, you can use them how you feel. and they're like, oh, tell me what to do. I don't know what to do with this. And the phones come out, and it's just like, no phones. I wonder, I know that the children that I work with, when I first started doing Godly Play, it was like rabbit in the headlights. It was like they'd never had free choice before. And it was really hard for them. Bonnie?
Yeah, that's interesting what you're saying there about the sense of free choice, but even just the fact that there's going to be no judgment, and that whatever they feel like they want to present or represent is fine, and so that fear of doing the right thing or the wrong thing, particularly like the scenarios that were demonstrated in that video, that I just thought that was a really good depiction of the fear and that hypervigilance. So if they're worried about a response or a reaction, maybe is a better word, then I suppose it's trying to really make that really safe space, and whatever is required in our both verbal and non-verbal communication. Particularly I'm thinking non-verbals here, because again, if they're in hypervigilance mode, they'll pick up on all kinds of things, and it may be that place for them to truly suddenly be the real own wee person without having to worry.
Yeah,
that's what's coming to my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that sounds so good. And I hope it takes time for them to trust that, though. That won't happen in the first Godly Play session. It might not happen in the second or the third, but by the fourth or the fifth, they're going, oh yeah, she doesn't stick it on the wall. She doesn't hold it up and tell everybody what a lovely picture it is. She really does say, take that is yours, that is for you. And if I don't make anything, that's fine too. And it takes a while, and that repetition and the same experience over and over again for that child to eventually trust that. It takes longer for children with trauma to trust, because they've been let down so many times before. Yeah, Rhonda's put in the chat that so many of the ACEs needs for self-regulation, co-regulated sensory needs have such a high overlap with neurodiverse needs, and the sensory regulations and adaptations needed. Absolutely. So a lot of what I'm saying will be useful if you have children who are neurodiverse in your classroom, and you will. And if I say to you that something I learned the other day, which I found quite upsetting, that's 1 in 5 children live with domestic violence and domestic abuse. You will have children in your circle who are living with something horrible. So it's being realistic about that. Bonnie?
Yeah, that's a bit of a raw nerve one here at this end, and I'm just quite conscious that if that's going on for people in your group, that if there's a sense of judgment, whether it's even societal or neighbourhood judgment, and the child feels like everybody's against their parent, who of course they love dearly, I think we have to have that emotional maturity to continue with that sense of, continual positive regard, or whatever terminology you want to use, but not that actually makes that acceptable or fine. If the child then feels they can't speak out, or this is just normal, like normalizing harm, so to speak, but actually that each individual still matters. And because I just feel if that child then's hearing or seeing that everybody's against a parent, that's not helpful either, and can isolate the child.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's more about their experience and keeping that in the circle, that safe circle for them to be themselves. Certainly. Something I did that may or may not be the right thing, but it seemed to help the group I had when they just found it really hard what to do with this box of paints, what's to do with this plasticine or these pebbles or whatever it was. As when we first started, I put out a few of those sort of mindfulness colouring, and so they could colour and think, and it sort of you know, it wasn't the product that was important, it was the process that they were going through, as far as I was concerned. And that was like a little crutch for them before they sort of got to know and understand that they could choose anything, and actually these other things were possible, that you could paint a picture that was just all red if you wanted, or you could learn to use the paints in that time, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah, that was a useful in-between step for us as well. And also working, allowing them to work in little groups. Yes, Bonnie.
Yeah, you're just making me think about, you know, the carefulness about assumptions that children will know what to do with an amazing range of resources, because I think that was one of the things I picked up when I did the Godly Play, you know, the course, was that real generosity of materials. And if we're going to invest in anything, invest in great resources. But they may never have engaged with these things before or know what really to do with them. And if their concentration span or their that previous experience even is limited or non-existent with particular resources, then that may really need guided and supported, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, dual person can help with that, with a little bit of one-to-one. But, you know, sometimes what I would do at the beginning, I would keep it fairly simple, what was on offer, and then each week I would introduce a new thing. Oh, I've got the Buddha boards out today, and this is how you use them, and this is how I might do my wandering, but it's up to you. This is where it goes, and this is how you look after it. But that's alongside the paints and the plasticine, you know, and the bricks, and introduce them gradually to them so they're not too overwhelmed at the beginning. I think that's important as well. So the feast, this is what happens with our feast if we're not careful when we do it at my house. Obviously it's one family, so they're really relaxed when they're here, and so their experience of trauma has left them with a trauma of scarcity, which both of them now believe in their DNA, and we're trying to undo this, but they believe there will never be enough to go around. There will never be enough of you and your attention. There will never be enough food or treats to go around. So that means I must stuff my pockets full of all of it. It manifests as a sort of greediness, a selfishness, which they're not intending at all. They're just responding to their emergency alarm saying, you'll never get these things again. There will never be enough. You must hoard it and keep it safe because you might need it later. Or you must stuff it all in your mouth now because otherwise the others will eat it. And so we've ritualized, we've emphasized the ritual almost of, you know, you're going to hand this out, and next week your brother will hand it out, and then we'll have the napkin, and then we'll have one piece of pepper and one piece of apple. That's what we're doing today. And I have to be really clear about that, because otherwise you know, the child who's handing it out makes their own little pile and then hands everybody else's out, and there's not really enough for everybody else. So that's important. Obviously you need to be aware of children's dietary needs and things like that, and make sure that you're not handing out something that somebody can't eat or isn't allowed to eat. That's important as well. Bonnie.
Yeah, I'm also wondering though about the converse, about children who maybe are used to having to attend to everybody else, and they're not seeing that they have also that equal right to them having their fair share, so to speak. And so I totally take your point on board, Susie, but I think that other side can still be in the mix depending on what that culture or those patterns are in certain home spaces that could be quite ingrained.
Absolutely. So yeah, absolutely. So that it could be linked to their sense of worth, a sense of visibility, and value. So absolutely. So that the ritualistic side of the feast can be really helpful for that. It structures it so that we're all the same, we're all taking turns, and then we eat together. That's really hard for them. That really hard. But it became a challenge almost, especially with the group I had in Hull. There, you know, so, oh, we're not eating it yet. Oh, no, we're not eating it yet. Now we're eating together. Now we're eating together. And it was a real celebration. It felt like a real celebration when we were all able to eat and drink together. Has anybody got anything else they'd like to add about the feast?
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering there as well about how we sometimes need to be careful about the reinforcing a negative where, you know, looking after everyone else before yourself and these sorts of things. And if there's a family mechanism that reinforces these negative and unhelpful beliefs for a child in their place in the family, never mind anything else, I think how we express these things, we need to be quite careful about not running the risk that their circumstances don't matter, or that someone else is always before them, and perhaps more of an equality perspective. But again, it depends what their circumstances are.
Yeah, so it goes back to knowing your children as much as possible and talking with your door person after each session and debriefing, making your notes, and and making sure that it's not always the same children giving out the feast each week, that's shared around, that we take turns being served and serving as well. That's really important. So we get to the blessing and the dismissal. I wonder how God's love can be shown through you as we end the session together. I wonder how we can bless these children, how we can send them out from our godly playroom in a way that is affirming and loving and sets them up for the week, maybe even. I wonder how could we do that, do you think?
We can thank them for being there and being themselves.
Absolutely.
I think just just repeating that process that was begun at the beginning when they came into the room, you're just doing it all over again, but you know, noticing what they've contributed, but not necessarily bringing their attention to those specific things, because I think that would be suggesting that was acceptable or not. But just in the way that you have noticed them, you can acknowledge how much you've enjoyed them being there.
Absolutely, and have that moment of connection and attachment one-to-one with them. A special moment, just the two of you, each child, as you go around the room. Bonnie, what did you want to say?
Yeah, I suppose it's just really building on that, about that real intentionality about with the verbals and the non-verbals, and taking that moment, you know, that as they're going, and if the parents are there too, that it's really clear that we've been so glad to have them with us, and we'd look forward to them coming back if they can come along, if it's free the next time, and again, without making those assumptions or pressures, and because I think the verbals as well as the non-verbals, particularly if there's hypervigilance going on, that they align is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I wonder what you're wondering now. I wonder if there's something that we've skipped over that you'd like to go back to, you have a question, or there's something about your own situation you'd like to talk to. I'll unshare for a moment there so we can see each other. So I wonder what you're wondering, if there's anything you'd like to ask about or talk about now. Now we've been through the whole of a Godly Play session.
I'm thinking about the kind of information that we are privy to before children come into our groups. So, for instance, when parents complete, sort of registration forms for Sunday school and other church-based children's groups, and in my limited experience, they don't tell you very much about the child's background. I've had a couple of terrible experiences where parents didn't mention something very significant about a child's diagnosis of something that hinders their learning. And the implication for me was really difficult, but it was very hard. It's very hard to know how to respond, because not all Sunday school, Sunday club leaders and teachers and volunteers have the capacity to or the responsibility to go and find out why a child is behaving the way they are. That can be really difficult. I think often in churches we're rather stuck with limited information.
Yeah, I wonder if there's if anybody's got a format that is a bit of a registration form that might ask more carefully phrased, gently asking questions that might allow a parent to say, actually, my child might struggle with this, or my child is adopted, actually. Or these three children, siblings that you're getting this week are my foster children, and they're only with me for a few weeks. That sort of thing is really valuable information. Absolutely. Yeah. Rondi, muted.
I just noticed that. I know one thing I've noticed is, like, I'm really fortunate in the congregation that I work in. It's really team ministry, so it's those constant conversations with the two ministers, and I'm the children's coordinator, just about the pastoral care needs, and it's building those long-term relationships, which I don't know, I don't think that happens in the same way if it's after school classroom, really big group kind of things. But I think that's such a big part of it, is just not just building the relationship with the children, but building the relationship with the families.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I find, like, when I send out information, I'm sending out information, for things that we're doing with our kids, but also just these are resources for parents just as often.
Yeah.
On all of this, but yeah.
Yeah. Now you say that, Rondi, I'm remembering the group that I work with, the Godly Play group. I actually started volunteering with the Breakfast Club and then the Mums group, because I wanted to understand the families better and get to know them better. And then that's what the baby group grew out of, actually, doing that. So it really, especially with a group, if you've got children with special needs of any kind, really, you really need to make an effort getting to know the parents. Definitely. Fantastic. So we're coming to the end now. So here are some books. They're just a few of what's on my shelf, and I highly recommend these. These are both about the trauma-informed classroom. I think probably they're both brilliant in their ways, but What About Me possibly I would put slightly above the trauma and attachment aware classroom, and it's worth looking at that and looking at how you do church, I would say, to be quite honest. It would have thought, and then you've got these other books about trauma as well, which are all highly readable as well. So Bonnie, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just thinking when our other group member there was speaking, really about the importance of that whole church family thing, though. And I know you've spoken quite a bit here, Susie, about safeguarding, but I think we need to be really careful that even if one person who's part of the bigger church family or associated with the bigger church family where godly play is taking place, can actually be quite damaging if there's a difficulty or a challenge for a child. And I suppose it's again about that shared learning or that collective effort of learning about these matters that really matters. So as if, particularly if children or families are in a hypervigilant state, then what they're picking up on, you know, it's how we can be collectively more sensitive and appropriate is what I'm thinking here, rather than just in the godly play group, and societally so also. And I'm maybe sounding a bit utopian when I'm speaking like this, but it doesn't take a lot to cause damage is really what I'm meaning. And actually perhaps that then anxiety to come back because of a wrong word or a dismissive word. So even the titles of these books, you know, there's no such thing as naughty. That word naughty, I just find really challenging when there's a lot of misunderstanding about behaviours.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, churches are full of traumatised people. And that's what they're there for. But it does mean that, you know, you do have to be very careful with you know, these children, make sure they are safe, because you know, in the godly playroom they might be, but as soon as you come out, there may be people who are sort of unsafe for them actually, because they have their own trauma and they trigger one another. Actually, that's what's going on. Yes, Rundi.
And I was going to say too, like, and I apologize if I'm making too many associations between neurodiverse communities. I know that's something, but I see the parallels in some of this. I think that's a big part of it too, is educating the whole congregation. And some of that isn't necessarily up front, oh, we're having this, but some of it's in the language, like, you know, it's, I think, for example, in our congregation, we've normalized, okay, and this is more to do with autism, but if it's, the organ is loud, and it's really hard for kids with autism who has sensory issues to sit through a really loud organ. So we've normalized that the kids can, they're fine to get up and walk around, or they can leave and sit out in the area where they can see the sanctuary, and it's doing things like that. And then if we have, you know, other adults talking about stuff like that, then it's like, well, you know what, everybody's able to hear to get out of worship. They're welcome to go where they need to get the most out of worship. And, you know, it's I'm not explaining myself well, but it's a subtle communication that doesn't shame the person making the comment. It doesn't shame the children who are doing what they need to do. And I think it's similar for I think some of the family we've had with high ACEs, as well, where it's, oh, well, this is what works for them and what their family needs, you know. But it's that I'm really not explaining myself well, but it's that weaving the education into the conversations as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't think that can just come from one person. I think it's the ministry team doing that, and it's the parents who know, and it's, you know, it's creating that sense of the education, normalizing co-regulation and normalizing self-regulation. Like we have fidget baskets in our congregation, for example. They're at the back, and there's a basket that says, if you need a fidget to listen better, help yourself, like things like that, where there's just things that the entire congregation can move forward together.
Yeah, and that's something you can have in a godly playroom as well, is fidget toys can be very helpful. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I think there's an awful lot that I have taken from Godly Play, which I wish I saw in my church. And, you know, and I think the way Godly Play is so trauma informed is something that could be informing the wider church very much. Bonnie, did you want to add?
Yeah, it was just really picking up on what our group member there was saying, and whether that's what you're trying to convey. I feel you've sent a lot of points to my mind there, and I mean, I've learned so much from the Godly Play Scotland group and the resources and the learning activities over COVID, and one of them was looking at children's spirituality and this concept of spiritual harm. And, you know, when we look at safeguarding, the focus can be quite physical or emotional rather than actually the spiritual harm. And when we think about these, even just the glance, the wrong look, the look that can be harmful and so on, and how that can impact on that child's sense of, or even an adult for that matter, sense of who they are and their transcendence in a situation. And I do wonder if we really need to raise our game on what we mean by safeguarding. And I've learned so much because of Godly Play, and I've no doubt so much more to learn. But it's really that whole concept of a safe space and what a safe space really means. And yet, what does that really look like in a congregation if children are being asked up to the front and they have to kind of perform or answer questions? And I find that fills me with horror personally. And yes, these are different techniques perhaps with different people, but yeah, I think organisationally, when we have national church organisations or whatever, I truly feel there's opportunity there for revisiting what we really mean by safeguarding in that holistic way about safeguarding, and with particular consideration about these maybe more sensitive ways of experiencing things.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm in the process of writing something about ACEs and the church at the moment, and I'm hoping to have a sort of training session with handout is what I'm working towards at the moment. And yeah, all of that having church as a safe space for everybody is the key, really. So there's my email. If you ever want to contact me directly, I'm susie@live.com. And if you would like to find out more about ACEs, there's absolutely tons out there, but my Facebook page, Hey ACEs, which stands for Hull and East Yorkshire ACEs, I follow all kinds of different sites, and I collate the stuff I like on there. It's a really good little library of resources now. And that's who I do the training, the ACEs training with, should you ever want to look that up. And so I am finished now, and it's been so lovely to share this with you and talk to you all about this, and I hope it's been helpful. I know I've benefited greatly from your contributions, so thank you for that. Yes, so I hope that it's been helpful for you all.
Thank you so much, Susie, for your time and for giving this webinar for us tonight. I think it's been really helpful to me to hear it for, I think, the third time now I've been hearing it, because you have so much knowledge to share, and it's been good to hear everyone else's contributions and get some more insights tonight as well. But for tonight, thank you so much for joining us, and big thank you to Susie for giving up your time and giving us this webinar tonight. And do encourage you to keep in contact with Susie. She's given you her email. Do email her, do follow the Facebook page. It's fantastic. There's lots of great insight from that. So thank you all very, very much.